They called him cold, distant, unreadable. But those were not flaws, they were weapons. The man who understands the power of silence no longer needs to speak to dominate a room. He no longer begs for attention or validation. His presence becomes the message. Machiavelli understood that true authority does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers nothing and still demands obedience. Imagine walking into a room and commanding respect without saying a word. That's not charisma, that's psychological warfare. It's the art of holding back when everyone else rushes to speak. It's letting your silence provoke thoughts, doubts, and fears in those around you. Most people talk too much, trying to explain themselves, justify their actions, gain approval. But the more you explain, the more power you give away. The more you speak, the more predictable you become. The cold silence, it cloaks you in mystery. It makes people project their own fears, hopes, and insecurities onto you. They don't know what you're thinking, so they assume the worst or the best, and that gives you leverage. In a world that's noisy, reactive, desperate for attention, silence becomes a superpower. When someone insults you and you don't respond, you signal that their opinion is beneath your concern. When someone questions you and you answer with a calm stare, you imply superiority, not submission. When others panic and you remain unmoved, you radiate control. Machiavelli taught that appearances matter more than intentions, and silence creates the most powerful appearance of all: control. People equate silence with confidence, with hidden strength, with danger. The silent man is unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. You never reveal your full hand. You let others underestimate you or overestimate you, but never truly know you. And that uncertainty makes you a threat. Look how the most dangerous leaders in history operated. They weren't loud. They didn't need to explain their actions. They let their decisions speak for them, and their silence created fear, admiration, or both. Silence is not passivity. It is a deliberate rejection of the need to explain yourself. It's an imposition of psychological weight without words. A man who speaks too much is trying to win people over. A man who remains silent forces people to come to him. That is the essence of power. Speak when it serves a purpose. Remain silent when it serves your dominance. Your words are like currency. The more you spend, the less they're worth. But when you speak rarely and precisely, every word carries weight. Silence becomes the frame that amplifies each syllable. But beyond tactics, silence has another power. It trains you. It sharpens your observation. When you're not constantly talking, you start noticing the lies in people's smiles, the fear in their confidence, the cracks in their stories. You learn to read the room, not to fill it. You become a strategist, not a performer. And that's what Machiavelli understood. Power is not about expression, it's about perception. And cold silence creates the perception of depth, calculation, and force. The modern world wants you to overshare, to react instantly, to prove yourself. Refuse. Be still. Be unreadable. Let your silence haunt them. Let it create tension. Let it make them desperate to know what you're thinking while you study them in return. Cold silence isn't emptiness. It's restraint. It's the art of not giving others access to your mind. When used with intent, silence becomes the loudest form of dominance. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to be silent long enough for everyone to lean in and realize that they've already lost the upper hand. That's the power Machiavelli would teach today. Never beg, never explain, never chase. Just stand still, cold and silent, and watch the world orbit around your gravity. They will ask themselves questions you never planted. They'll replay your expressions, the tilt of your head, the stillness in your eyes, in your silence. They'll hear accusations you never made, confidence you never claimed, wisdom you never revealed. Because silence allows others to fill in the blanks, and they always do, most of the time. They fill it with their own insecurities. That's the invisible blade. That's what makes the cold, silent man more dangerous than 1,000 shouting fools. Machiavelli would call this the highest form of strategic behavior. He knew that power is perception, and perception is crafted more through absence than excess. To be loud is to be common. To be quiet is to be feared. Because when you do speak, when you finally choose to break your silence, your words crash like thunder. They don't just echo, they leave impact. People listen, not because they want to, but because they need to. You've trained them to pay attention by denying them the comfort of knowing you. This is not about being antisocial or withdrawn. It's about calculated presence. You are not silent because you lack something to say. You are silent because you choose the value of your voice. You withhold, not out of fear but out of control. And in that withholding, you change the power. Dynamic, you shift the center of gravity. Others are pulled into your orbit. They begin adjusting their behavior to you. They start overthinking, second-guessing, attempting to decode what they assume you meant. All the while, you stay calm, untouched, unmoved. You become the mirror that reflects their chaos back at them, and that mirror terrifies them. It reminds them that they don't really know what they're doing, but you might. It reminds them that your silence isn't emptiness, it's dominance. It's a rejection of the performative noise that weak men use to mask their fear. It's the refusal to dance for approval, and that refusal that's stoic. Ice-cold detachment is magnetic. It makes them want your validation, your attention, your reaction. But you give them none, because you don't need their approval. You don't crave their comfort. You don't operate on their rhythm. And that's the deepest source of your power. The man who does not need the world has the leverage to shape it. The man who can remain still while others beg, scream, and cry out is the man they all eventually follow, even if they don't understand why. Silence, in this context, is not just an absence of words. It is the presence of authority, of inner security, of total control over your instincts. The weak man blurts out every thought because he lacks discipline. He tries to explain his value because he's unsure he has any. He uses noise to compensate for emptiness. But the strong man understands. A single glance, held long enough, can do what entire speeches fail to do. It can communicate power. It can instill fear. It can shift loyalty. Think of the moments in history where silence changed everything. The calm before a storm. The second a leader stands and says nothing but everyone listens anyway. The pause before a verdict. The gaze across a battlefield. The held breath in a negotiation room. Those are not moments of weakness. They are moments of precise, calculated strength. And the man who can own that moment without needing to fill it with noise owns the outcome. And so, train yourself. Train to resist the urge to explain, to reply, to prove. Let others scramble to be understood. You will remain beyond reach. Let others chase the spotlight. You will become the shadow that defines its shape. Let others waste their words. You will weaponize your silence. Machiavelli would say, a man who speaks less rules more. Because speech is often an emotional impulse, but silence that is a choice. It requires strength, discipline, and vision. In silence, you become unreadable. And the unreadable man is dangerous because no one knows where he stands, what he wants, or what he will do next. He becomes the master of unpredictability. And unpredictability is one of the purest forms of psychological control. People fear what they cannot prepare for. They fear what they cannot predict. They fear you if you master this. So let them talk. Let them perform. Let them show their hands, their intentions, their needs. You will remain still, like ice, watching, listening, measuring, and when the time is right, if the moment demands it, you will speak but not to explain, only to strike, only to end the conversation with a sentence, a stare, a silence heavier than any word could carry. That is how the cold silence becomes your throne. That is how you rule, not by volume, but by void, not by demand, but by detachment. And that is how Machiavelli would teach the modern man to dominate a world addicted to noise, with silence that freezes, chills, and commands. But silence is not merely the absence of noise. It is a message, a boundary, and a mirror, all in one. It's the invisible line that tells others, you will not be granted access to what you haven't earned. And when you consistently embody that stance, you no longer have to remind people of your worth. They begin to feel it. Not through your words, but through your restraint. They learn to interpret your silences like scripture. They search for meaning in your pauses. They measure their own behavior against your reactions or lack thereof. Because the man who embraces the cold silence is no longer part of the crowd. He is outside of it, above it, untouched by its panic and its hunger. He watches it, studies it, learns from it, but never becomes it. That is why people both fear and respect what they cannot control. And nothing is harder to control than a man who does not need to be seen or heard to know who he is. This man no longer wastes energy trying to correct the opinions others have of him. He understands what Machiavelli hinted at centuries ago, that perception is a tool, not a truth. And you don't need to constantly defend your truth. You shape perception by what you choose to reveal or conceal. Silence, then, becomes a sculptor. Each withheld word is a chisel against the stone of your persona, carving out a figure that others can only interpret but never fully grasp. There's a strange irony here. The more you explain yourself, the less people believe you. The more you speak, the more room you give others to analyze, criticize, and twist your meaning. But when you speak less, and only when absolutely necessary, your words take on the weight of prophecy. Your silence forces others to lean in, to pay attention, to wonder, and in that wonder, they begin to respect, maybe even fear. Now look at relationships, especially those built on power dynamics. A man who cannot be read keeps the upper hand. When others don't know if you're angry, indifferent, or calculating, they walk on edge. They second-guess themselves. They hesitate. And hesitation gives you leverage, because the one who moves last, with purpose, always moves with advantage. Consider this: when someone disrespects you and you react emotionally, you validate their power. You reveal that they've touched something sensitive. But when you respond, with cold silence, a gaze, a nod, and nothing more, you strip them of the satisfaction. You turn their provocation into their own embarrassment. They begin to feel exposed, foolish, unsure. Why? Because they expected a reaction, and you denied it. You denied them you. That's real strength. This doesn't mean you detach from emotion completely. It means you channel it. You become the master of your emotional expression, not its slave. And silence is the most refined expression of that mastery. A man who can sit with his rage without unleashing it. A man who can contain his sadness without collapsing. A man who can walk away without explanation. These are the men others remember, not because they shouted, but because they didn't need to. Silence, then, becomes not just a tool for interaction, but a lifestyle. It governs how you handle conflict, how you approach success, how you deal with betrayal, and how you move through the world. You become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to read, and that makes you incredibly more powerful. In the court of public opinion, where everyone is screaming to be heard, your silence sets you apart. You are not trying to win arguments. You are not trying to prove points. You are not trying to be liked. You are trying to win. And winning, in the Machiavellian sense, means controlling outcomes regardless of feelings, appearances, or temporary applause. People will project everything onto your silence: respect, fear, mystery, envy, even hatred. Let them. Each of those emotions means you are being perceived as a force, not just a person. And people respond to force. They may not love it, but they follow it. They obey it. They bend to it. Even your allies will feel it. They'll admire you for your calm under pressure, for your ability to listen without rushing to speak, for the way you observe what others miss. They'll feel safer around you, not because you talk a lot, but because when you do talk, it means something. And when you don't, it means even more. And here's the final truth: silence is not the absence of influence. It is influence in its purest, most undiluted form. It is the art of creating impact without effort, tension without aggression, power without noise. This is what Machiavelli would whisper to you across the centuries. Do not announce yourself. Do not explain yourself. Do not exhaust yourself in defense. Remain composed. Let your enemies speak. Let your rivals expose themselves. Let the world reveal its hand. You stay still, cold, watching, waiting. Then when the moment is right, act with precision. Speak with finality, and return to silence, because in that silence lies your greatest weapon. The mystery of your presence, the weight of your gaze, the calm certainty that you are not here to be heard, you are here to be felt. And when the world finally realizes that, it will stop trying to talk over you. It will listen. And once the world begins to listen to your silence, truly listen, you become something more than a man. You become a force, a presence, a myth in motion. You stop being judged by what you say and start being defined by what you withhold. In Every room you enter, your silence precedes you. It's not emptiness, it's a signal. A message that says, I am not here to impress you. I am not here to play your game. I am the exception to your expectations. You see, most men live with a compulsive need to be understood. They believe that being misunderstood is failure, that silence is weakness, that if people don't see their worth, they must shout it louder. But Machiavelli would disagree. He would say, the man who must explain his worth has already lost it, because true power is recognized, not declared. True influence is felt, not argued. And the man who embraces the cold silence understands this. He does not fear being misunderstood. In fact, he welcomes it, because while others are busy interpreting his motives, his silence gives him space to act, plan, observe. He is free from the prison of opinion, free from the burden of constant explanation. While the world burns itself out in debates, clarifications, and justifications, he remains untouched, because he knows influence is not won in words, but in weight, in aura, in mystery. That's what silence gives you, mystery. And mystery is magnetic. The moment people think they have you figured out, you lose control. But when they never quite know where you stand, when they're unsure whether you admire or despise them, whether you're preparing to strike or simply watching, they stay cautious. They show respect. They measure their words more carefully. And in that carefulness, you hold control. Let's speak clearly. Silence does not mean passivity. It's not about becoming invisible or docile. It's about learning when to speak and why. It's about valuing your words the same way a master swordsman values his blade, never unsheathing it unless it's absolutely necessary. And when he does, striking clean and final. No wild swings, no wasted energy, just impact. And that's the key, impact. In a world where everyone is talking, nothing means anything. Words are cheap because they're everywhere. But your silence makes your words expensive. It makes them land harder, cut deeper, linger longer. Because when people know you speak only when something matters, they listen. They don't interrupt. They don't doubt. They wait for your voice like a decision is about to be made. That's not charisma. That's cultivated power, even in leadership. The cold, silent man commands more loyalty than the loud, performative one. Because people sense depth, they sense calculation. They sense that there's more going on behind your eyes than behind 1,000 speeches. And when the world gets chaotic, they don't look to the noisemaker, they look to the man who stands still, the man who doesn't panic, the man who doesn't need to be the center of attention, because he already is. You want to be that man? Then start now. Stop rushing to fill silences in conversations. Stop explaining yourself to those who haven't earned the right to question you. Stop reacting emotionally to provocations. Pause, observe, let others show their hand. Let them spill their weaknesses, their insecurities, their need to be seen. And you, be the one they can't read. Be the man who listens more than he speaks, who holds eye contact a second too long, who nods once and says nothing else, who leaves rooms before the conversation is over because he doesn't need the last word. He is the last word. Understand this. Cold silence is a statement of self-possession. It tells the world that your mind is not a public domain, that your emotions are not up for negotiation, that your soul is not available to be picked apart by strangers or fools. You are not cold because you lack feeling, you are cold because you have mastered it. And in that mastery lies a strength no loud voice can imitate. This is why, through history, the most feared men weren't the ones who shouted orders. They were the ones who sat quietly, let others speak first, and then offered a single, deliberate command that changed everything. They were the ones who could walk into a negotiation and say nothing for 10 minutes, letting silence do the intimidating. They were the ones who didn't have to argue because they had already decided. This is your blueprint. This is your edge. This is how you rise above the noise, above the emotional chaos, above the average man scrambling for attention. Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to be silent for silence's sake. He'd tell you to use it, sharpen it, let it shape your presence, let it become part of your reputation. Let people say, he doesn't say much, but when he does, and never finish that sentence, because the not knowing is what keeps you powerful. And remember, the man who talks little but sees everything wins everything. So say less. Hold more. Be colder, and let your silence speak so loudly that no one ever doubts where you stand, even if they never truly understand who you are. Eventually, your silence becomes more than just a tool. It becomes your signature, a mark of your presence that echoes louder than the voices trying to fill the void. You become the one they all talk about after you've left the room, the one whose stillness disrupted the rhythm, whose silence made people feel exposed, uncertain, vulnerable. Because that's what cold silence does. It forces people to sit with their own thoughts, their own noise, their own insecurities, while you remain composed, unmoved, sovereign. They won't admit it out loud, but deep down, they'll admire you for it. They'll say you're intimidating, hard to read, detached. But what they really mean is that you don't need them, and that terrifies people. Because we live in a world of emotional dependence, a world where validation is traded like currency. But when you withdraw from that system, when you no longer need to be affirmed, liked, or even understood, you gain leverage over everyone who does. That's why the cold, silent man is rare, and why he's powerful. He doesn't need to dominate with volume. He dominates by refusing to compete for attention. While other men beg to be seen, he disappears into the background only to reappear when it matters, when the moment is his to define. That's the paradox. By being less present, you become more present. People feel your absence like a weight. They notice when you're not speaking. They wonder what you're thinking, and in that wondering, they hand you their attention willingly. This is not about being arrogant or aloof. It's about being intentional. It's about recognizing that not everything requires your reaction, that every opinion doesn't deserve a response, that most conversations are distractions dressed as connection. And the cold, silent man knows that his energy is currency. He does not waste it. He does not spend it proving himself to those who've already decided not to understand him. Instead, he invests it in strategy, in self-respect, in observation. He watches how people talk too much to cover up how little they know. He listens to how they contradict themselves, how they chase agreement, how they seek approval through confession. And he says nothing, not because he has nothing to say, but because he has nothing to prove. His silence becomes a boundary, a shield, a sword. Let them call it coldness. Let them label it as emotional distance. That's not your concern. Your concern is discipline. Your concern is control. Because in a world that's constantly baiting you to react, to explain, to justify, your refusal becomes a quiet rebellion, a power move, a declaration that you are not theirs to consume. And what happens next is inevitable. They begin to chase your words. They begin to crave your insight, your approval, your presence, not because you marketed it, but because you withheld it. In that withholding, you flipped the dynamic. You made them work for something that others give away for free. It's the same in every arena: business, relationships, leadership, negotiation. The man who speaks less, who reacts less, who keeps his cards close to his chest, always holds the stronger position, because people can't attack what they can't see. They can't manipulate what they can't predict. They can't overpower a man who won't show his weakness, or worse, won't show anything at all. And when you do choose to speak, it lands like iron. Your words have been distilled by silence, tempered by patience, refined by restraint. There's no waste, no noise, just precision. And that kind of speech cuts deeper than any scream. It's the sentence that ends the argument, the phrase that shifts the negotiation, the truth that silences a room. But it only works if you've earned it, if your silence is real, if it comes not from insecurity, but from confidence, not from fear, but from sovereignty. Anyone can stay quiet, but not everyone can make that quiet mean something. That's what sets you apart, because your silence isn't empty, it's full of things you've seen but didn't speak about, full of insights you chose not to share, full of power you never had to flash. And they feel it, even if they don't know how, even if they don't understand why. They feel it in the way they lower their voice when speaking to you, in the way they hesitate before disagreeing, in the way they try to impress you without even realizing it. You didn't ask for respect. You didn't demand authority. You simply were silent, still, unbothered. And that alone was enough. Machiavelli would smile at that. He'd tell you you've understood the essence of power not through domination, not through persuasion, but through presence, through the cold silence that doesn't plead, doesn't chase, doesn't explain. So continue, let your silence unsettle, let it linger, let it draw them in while keeping them at a distance. Let it speak on your behalf, calm, calculating, complete. And remember, the world will always try to pull you into its noise. Your power lies in your refusal to answer.